Good morning. My name is Bill Amirault, and I want to welcome you to Career Clarity and Purpose. In this live event and also on the recordings, my panel of 14 experts will reveal their strategies to provide career clarity aligned with your true purpose. Was your career and life impacted by COVID? Candidly, I don't know anybody's whose wasn't. Have you been downsized, right-sized, reorged, rift, let go, or any other euphemism that goes along with being separated from your company or your organization? For what it's worth, I've experienced all of those, some of them more than once, or maybe you were part of the Great Resignation. Either way, you may be at a point in your career now or have been, or maybe shortly in the future, where you want to make a shift or a change. And my guest here this morning is Meryl Canner. She and I first met when I was lucky enough to present at the Jewish Vocational Services in Whippany, New Jersey. And her background is career coaching, counseling, and career services, primarily through JVS for a number of years. But now Meryl is working on her own Canner Career Services, and where she says, I provide a safe, positive, and encouraging place to help clients in the spectrum of career issues, from exploring to manifesting what those might be. So I just want to say welcome this morning to Meryl. And how are you?
I'm good. So first, I want to thank you for inviting me. This is probably a little out of my comfort zone. And the weird thing is being on this side of the camera, because I'm usually in your seat, organizing the speakers, letting the people in, checking the chat room. So it's very strange for me to be the presenter or whatever I am, the discussee here. So thank you. And when I looked at the list of the people that you're talking to today, a lot of them I know. All of you were amazingly gracious in presenting for free for our programs at JVS. Some of you multiple times. So I looked at the list and said, I don't belong on that list. So it's very weird to be part of this, but thank you again for letting me be here with you.
Well, the phrase imposter syndrome has come up a couple of times this morning. And if I can talk you out of that, like right now, immediately, I'm going to do it. Because you know, my interactions with you going back several years have been that you were always supportive of every person that was in those rooms, sometimes as many as 50, and maybe there were more than that at certain times, but also what you used to do offline, individually, with the folks that you worked with through the years. And I'm so happy that you've been able to transition that experience and expertise into what you're doing right now. So, you know, one of the things that I want to speak to is, you know, how your different career moves or what parts of your life came together so that career coaching and mentoring and all that became central to what you were doing for JVS for a number of years, and now what you're doing with your own firm.
So the truth is, unlike a lot of people who end up in coaching from other places, this has been my career from the start. I was a peer counselor when I was an undergraduate at Barnard and decided I wanted to go in psychology. And back in those days, you couldn't really do much with a bachelor's in psychology, and other things, yes.
Right.
So I got a master's in career counseling. And the joke is when you get a master, not joke, but the interesting thing is I got a job at NYU through networking, because everyone at Teachers College where I got my master's and NYU were very connected. There was a lot of nepotism back and forth, and someone called and it was a networking kind of thing. And I walked in the first day to my job and my boss said something to me about, and this will date me, I'm sorry, about the big 8 accounting firms.
Ah, yes.
And I looked at him.
That are now 4.
Yeah,
yes.
Right. And I looked at him and I had no idea what he was talking about. Because in a master's of counseling program, you learn about counseling theory and you learn how to talk to people, but you don't learn about jobs. And I had no clue. So I spent back in those days, the recruiters would come on campus and had these beautiful laminated, gorgeous brochures they would give out to the students about different career paths, from Bloomingdale's to Macy's to, you know, one of the accounting firms. And I spent my first month just reading every one of those brochures so I could learn about jobs. But, you know, and that was sort of my on-the-job training really quickly. And the other joke was that I was basically a year or two older than most of my students. So what did I know? But back then I thought I knew what I was doing. I did know what I was doing, but maybe not as much as I do now. And I loved it. And what I will say probably a lot today is a lot of the people I work with, most people I work with, leave jobs not because they hate their jobs, but because they don't like the environment they're in or the person they're working for.
Correct.
And that was my situation, my first job. I had a boss that I didn't love and who was not being nice to me, and decided, okay, well, I'm going to go back and get a PhD and more in the clinical area. And I did all what that took, which was a lot of years to do that, and segued in that area, work with nursing, whatever. But somehow ended back in career counseling, and sort of by accident, but not really, because someone I had worked with at NYU who had moved on to JVS called me one day and said, there's a job here, and I think you would be perfect for it. And the key was, it was part-time, it was a Jewish agency. It offered me a lot of the things that I wanted in a job outside of the job itself. I was a young
Okay.
mother. I wasn't willing at that point to work full time.
Mhm.
So I think, again, as I talk to my clients, it's so much more than what the job is in terms of your skills and what you're actually doing, and a lot more about the, how it fits into your life. And that whole, I know it's very cliche, the work-life balance, but I took the job at JVS because of work-life balance and because of the values. As a career counselor, we always look at what you're good at, what you're interested in, and what your values are. And what I say to people are, what you're good at, what you're interested in, that doesn't change a lot from the time you're younger. You learn more about other opportunities, but the values change all the time. And what you want out of a job when you're 22 and single and living on the Upper West Side is very different than when you want out of a job when you're 34 and have 3 kids and living in suburbia, in terms of where it is and the hours and the, and the requirements and everything else. But even then, the goal was to stay at JVS for 2 years. I was studying for a licensing. I was getting prepared to get licensed in the state of New Jersey as a psychologist. It would be a 2-year thing. Then I was going to leave. And I didn't for another 24 years.
Too funny. No,
because there were so many things about that job that besides that, I loved what I did. I loved what I did, and I loved the people I was helping, and I got tremendous, and still do get tremendous reward out of it. It also fit my work-life balance for the most part until the end when it didn't. And then I decided it was time to move on. So that's a sort of brief. So my career has really not been that all over the place. I mean, it was always in psychology, and I took time to be more clinical, and then came back to being back in the career area, and love it.
Well, the way you described this when you were first, working at NYU and whatever, I also worked in grad school at Indiana University in the business placement office. It was my assistantship, which from a financial standpoint was frankly necessary at the time. But it was also a great learning experience because there were 650 plus companies that came through that kind of revolving door Grand Central Station type of thing. And my job as somebody who was only a couple of years older than the undergraduates was to help them find either their first internship or their first job. So that was the basis for doing this. And I was helping a friend with a favor back in 2013 when I kind of then full-time went into career coaching. But either way, we all get through different pathways, and it's the value that we can provide once we're there that makes the difference. So you've worked with, I have to say thousands. I don't know what the real number is.
I don't either.
of clients, probably who've been coming to you through the JVS. I'll start there, and then we can, work to what you're doing right now, in various stages of grief, which can be profound and long, unnecessarily, in some cases, depending on how the mindset of the person is and what their supportive network is around them. Could you speak to that in terms of people who have come to you in that type of circumstance where they've been blindsided, and that's happened to me more than once, both as a consultant and as a full-time employee. And then you say, okay, what am I going to do next? And then how did you go about that process? How do you go about that process of helping someone move from where they were to what they want to become? And that's, again, that's the whole theme of what we're talking about. I know you've done this like hundreds of times, so fire away.
So I think it sounds, I hate to sound really cliched, but it's really all about listening. It really is. And when a new client comes into me, the first thing I have to find out is, where are they today? And very often they would come in, they'd come in and they say, well, I really hate what I'm doing and I need to get out of it, but I need to pay the mortgage next month. And so my response to that would be, okay, well, if you really need a job now, we need to look for something that's related to what you were doing before, because that's easier than a whole career change. But once you get that, then we can work on a career change. Or very often it's about short-term and long-term. Again, I would have clients, and I went through too many, 2000 tech bubble, the recession, 2007, 2008, kept going, 2011, 2012, and now, of course, now. And a lot of people were like, okay, we need survival jobs. Okay, so what were the survival jobs? Substitute teaching, driving for Uber. I had an engineer once who was selling women's shoes at Nordstrom's. Never can understand how a guy can sell women's shoes, but that's another story. And he did that. Then he got a contract position and he cut back to the weekends just to keep his status at Nordstrom's. And then when he lost the contract position, that's when he came to see me. And we worked together while he was working again in Nordstrom's till he found a full-time job. He has been at PSE&G now for 20 some odd years.
Oh, so, wow. Okay.
It's really assessing, first of all, what is the need right now, especially financial. And I always say to all my clients, I don't make financial decisions for you.
Right.
To help you figure out what those are, what the reality is, in terms of what do you need right now and what do you need going forward. And then once we can figure that out, then we can figure out what's next. But it's really all about listening and about, again, all the things I learned so many years ago that makes me laugh, the summarizing, the repeating back, and just hearing. What I do best is sort of saying back to the person what I've heard, for them to either say, yes, you hit it on the mark, or no, that's exactly what I was thinking, but no one ever put it together so neatly like that before. So I think most coaches do that. I think that's what we do best, is listening and then helping them see something that they can't see, because we are an objective person. And I always said to my clients, my husband was out of work for a while. He was, he took a contract position. He was commuting from northern New Jersey to Long Island. I won't tell you what my Easy Pass bill was like at that point.
Right.
Ridiculous, more than rent. But, he had to take it because he was out of work and he needed to take it. But even being in this business, how they always say doctors should not treat their own family members. He wasn't going to listen to me. He didn't want to hear what I had to say. So most of my clients who are, they're saying, well, my spouse is driving me crazy. They want me to do this. They want me to do that. And then I will say, well, that's what we coaches do. We're the objective person who can help you outside. Your spouse is just there to support you, to hold your hand, to make you feel good about yourself when you're feeling like crap about yourself. And just tell them, but you don't expect them to help you. You expect them to let you just support you while the coach or the counselor or whoever it is, their friends, the networking group helps you through that. So basically, when I have a new client, it's really giving them a chance to explain to me where they are. And very often, a lot of it is also about compromise. I've had a lot of clients who don't want to compromise. And so again, it's about my listening and saying, well, you want a short commute, you want something very interesting, you want a great boss, you want lots of money. Well, maybe Bill Gates had a job like that, but all of us have to give up something. So let's talk about what is it that you're willing to compromise on. Maybe one, I know I don't want to be sexist here or any, but maybe one person is the head breadwinner and gets a job offer that's an hour and a half away, but $30,000 more. And the other one is the child caretaker. I won't put any sexes on this. And it's 10 minutes away, but it's $10,000 less. There's no right or wrong answer to that.
Right.
It's just about my sort of saying to them, these are the issues. These are the things you have to think about. And what are you willing to give up along the way? So, I mean, I know this, I could talk about this for hours, but it's sort of to help clients, it's mostly really to simplify it. It's really about sort of affirming to them, this is what I've heard. And then it's interesting because you said this before about supporting people who are going, and we all know job, and I used to say this at the beginning of all my programs, job searching sucks. It really does. And it's a horrible time in your life and you don't want to ever be doing it again. And when I would explain to people what I did in my job, I would say 50% of my job is teaching you to be the best job searcher you can be. But 50% of my job is helping you do what I've taught you and stay motivated and staying positive. So for instance, I had a client once who was sure she had a job offer. The guy even gave her a tour and everything else. And this is, again, back in the day when she got a letter of rejection. And she was devastated, called me hysterical crying. And I said, you know what? I said, today, here's your homework assignment. You are not going to job search. You're going to binge watch some TV program. You're going to eat a pint of ice cream. You're going to take a walk around the block and you're going to do everything. You're going to paint your toenails and your fingernails, and you're going to do nothing related to job searching because you need to mourn. You need to take this time to mourn something that you thought you had that you lost. And then tomorrow morning, we're going to have a call and we're going to say, okay, now let's start replanning. So it's the support part is so crucial. Because you can go online and a million places, learn how to interview and learn how to write a resume. But I think what distinguishes us as coaches that really is so beneficial is that we can listen and we can help them get through these rough patches, but get back on the horse. And one more thing I'll say, and I'll let you ask me another question. I had all kinds of things prepared to say. And then this morning I was on the phone with a client. I have now worked with on and off for years. She's been in jobs, but been miserable, but has such problems motivating herself. And she also is a therapist. And she said to me this, she was, again, suddenly it was like, well, I didn't get that much done this past time since our last appointment. And I've been thinking maybe I should take a pause. And I knew that I was coming here today. So I was even more thoughtful about this. And I said to her, like I said, 1 second. I said, we've been down this road before. And every time you take a pause until you get miserable again, and then you come back to me. So let's really look at what this pause is about. What is making you so uncomfortable?
Good point, right.
What it became was that she felt like she hadn't done enough, that she hadn't done enough homework. She wasn't, and then I had her list all the things she'd done since our last appointment. And then I said to her, you know what? I said, I'm going to yell at you now. Do you give me permission to yell at you now? And she said, why? I said, you just did these 5 things. Why are you telling me that you got nothing done since the last appointment? Yeah. It was amazing. She had really done a lot, but because she was such a glass half empty instead of glass half full kind of person, she couldn't see that. And afterwards, she said, wow, Meryl, she said, thank you for saying that to me. She said, because I would not have known, I really felt like I'd gotten nothing done and I shouldn't be talking to you anymore because I'm disappointing you. And I'm like, disappointing me? You could never disappoint me. But, you know, so that's what we do. We listen and then we hopefully get them past those roadblocks.
Well, if what I'm hearing you say, to use something that you were just saying earlier, is listen, explore, do, and evaluate. And it just as you're speaking that I kind of threw those 4 words together, because it sounds like that's where you are. And as I'm thinking about it, that's a lot of what I do, and probably the other folks who are going to be on this forum here today as well. So other specific examples where you were working with somebody who was really making a transition, and you mentioned before I get to that, you know, the stages of grief, you know, anger, denial, et cetera, that go along with it. And a whole page and a half in my book is to how to shorten that phase up. Like you gave this, the woman you're speaking about, okay, go, you know, binge watch, eat ice cream, get your nails done this afternoon. Tomorrow morning, we'll get to it. Because there is a period of time that you need to just decompress. And what I find with job seekers is that they get so consumed with it that if they're not doing job search, they think they're doing something wrong. And you mentioned that a minute ago, but it's like, hey, treat job search like a job. You're not going to work 80 hours a week or think about it all day, all night with it your job. So do the same with this. Have that healthy time when you're putting yourself all in to whatever the job search activities might be, and then have the healthy time away from it. And that's when you're going to have the balance that works out. So, you know, you started on a couple of stories there, but I'm sure there's some other ones where you gave them, quote unquote, permission to create career clarity that they may not have had before, or maybe your conversations with them individually, or even in a group setting, may have created an aha moment that somebody said, oh, you know what, I'm going to go do this now. I never even thought about that before until this happened, or this conversation happened, or somebody asked the right question, which is a lot of what you do as well. So a couple examples like that in terms of people giving themselves permission and then what the outcomes were.
Well, I think a lot of it is, I always say to people that it's mostly about lack of information. I think people, if they don't know what's out there and they don't know enough about themselves or what's out there, they don't know how to make these decisions or even what to think about. So sometimes when I'm working with a client, you know, the little wheels are spinning in my head and I might come up with some suggestions, but I also very much want them to sort of come up with their own suggestions. So I will give them homework assignments to go out there and explore different jobs, not for job search, but for career search, you know, to see what's out there. I had a client many, many years ago, really long time, a young kid, actually was from Israel, and he was visiting his grandparents during the summer. He had just gotten out of the army. And if anyone knows about Israeli kids who've been in the army, they're older, but they're so immature because they don't know, they haven't been to college yet or whatever. And he was a sculptor. That's what he loved doing.
Wow. Okay.
And so I give this assignment where I tell them to go look at different jobs around, you know, on all different websites and everything else. But I don't care if the job is here or in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, or wherever it is, to just look at job descriptions and see. And I tell them to look at reality jobs and fantasy jobs, because the fantasy jobs also tell me a lot about what's their attention, where their attention is going. And, you know, I don't know about you, I like to watch like Star Wars movies. At the end of a Star Wars movie, there's about 10 minutes of, you know, the credits of how many people work on those movies, more in the olden days when it wasn't all CG, but all that modeling and stuff had job titles that I never even heard of. And through the course of our guided research together, he came across this position in the theater, in the movie production area, that he could use his sculpting skills. Now,
Really?
I couldn't come up with that for him. And I always tell my clients, I know a lot about a lot of different careers, but I
Mhm.
don't know about every one of them. And I don't also know, I mean, except my own, but I know how to point you to directions to find that information. And then I'll teach you how to do those informational meetings to talk to people and get more information about what they do and what they do. And then, so what they do is come back to me every time. I always say you do the most work in between appointments.
Right.
My role when they come back is to help them synthesize all that information they've gathered, see what they have and what they don't have and what they're still missing, and then say, okay, this is the suggestion of where you should go next to find more in-depth information or more whatever, until we have enough information that they actually can say, oh yes, I really want to do this, and this is what I have to do to get a degree, or this is what I have to do to get a certification, or I have to do a volunteer, or I just have to start applying for jobs. And then we can move into the actual job search.
Yeah.
So it's really about gathering information and then my helping them figure out what that information all means and put it into a coherent package.
What ended up happening to your skilled sculptor soldier?
He went back to Israel, but I think that's what he was going to do. He was going to figure out how to get whatever certifications or internships. It was probably meant internships or volunteering or whatever on movie sets, and learn how to do that kind of thing. So I never heard of it after that, but
yeah, just this year I've had some experience on the other end of the camera at a video recording of a show called America's Real Deal, which is kind of like Shark Tank and Dancing with the Stars all put together with crowdfunding. Okay.
oh my God.
Okay. And being on the other side of this with people who do this kind of video production or set manufacture, or whatever you want to call it, is a field that I'd never had any exposure to. So it was a really good learning experience the first week of May to see all the behind the scenes stuff that goes on for stuff that you and I watch and say, oh, that's nice, you know, and all the work that goes into it. But yeah, and I'm sure you have some other examples here, but one of the things that I wanted to get to before you do is I'm a big fan of the principle called Ikigai. You've probably heard or seen this. You know, started in Japan, and then it's roughly translated as Dharma in Sanskrit and purpose in English. And there's an aspect of it in the first section of my book, and it's 4 circles in a format of a Venn diagram. It's what you're good at, what you enjoy doing, what you can get paid for, and what the world needs. And you mentioned 3 of them. You mentioned values a few minutes ago, but the combination of those, if you're in the bullseye of the 3 circles you mentioned and the 4 circles that I'm talking about, you're going to win. I mean, you're going to be getting up in the morning saying, hey, I'm not going to work. I'm going to do something that I just enjoy doing. It may be work, and it may be, and you're going to get paid for it because that's part of the deal. But you know, doing things that really resonate with you, and several of the other speakers have mentioned that in one way or another, you know, already today, and I'm sure more will before the day is over. So some other examples of that, where again, how your support gave your client permission to either move on from a field that they may not have been happy with, or, you know, like you mentioned, toxic environments or toxic bosses, into something that was just much more fruitful in the end.
So I have a story I definitely want to tell you, but just to comment on something you just said.
Yeah.
We talked before. I've worked with a lot of IT clients over the years, of course, and I don't understand it. I always say their resumes are Chinese, but it doesn't mean that I can't help them find the places where they need to talk to the right people to find out the stuff that I don't know. So I was just thinking that when you said that. But I had a client years ago who had gone to law school, spent 10 years doing document review, which is the lowest level of, you know, they may start off that way, but they usually move out.
Yes.
I'm a great law student. He didn't excel at that. And so we spent a lot of time talking at the beginning about what about law attracted to him, what did he love, what was he good at? And it became very clear that what he really liked was working with people and doing research. He was really good at both those things. So again, so what kind of careers will enable you to do that? And we hit upon maybe becoming a librarian. And then he spent the next couple months and worked really hard at it, talking to, you know, first reading about librarian programs and everything else, and then talking to librarians and all that other stuff, and finally applied to the School of Library Science down at Rutgers and got in. And he called me like in May when he got in, and I said, okay. I said, but you also want a job when you get out. It's very nice to have this degree, but how easy is this going to be? So I want you to go and get a job in a library. I don't care if you're just shelving books. but you
Right.
need to show that you've worked in a library. So he spent the next couple of weeks walking into 8 libraries within walking distance of driving distance of his house,
Sure.
just saying, I'll walk part-time or whatever. And he got a part-time job in one of them, very low level. But as the 2 years went by, while he was in graduate school, obviously he learned more. They took him to conferences. He moved up the ladder and everything else. And 3 months after he graduated with his degree, he had a job as a reference librarian. Story's not over yet because we're transitioning him again. So, okay, he did that. And then I heard from him a couple of years later. He was looking for assistant librarian position, like the head, whatever it's called, not the head librarian, but the assistant head librarian.
Right.
And I helped him with the resume and he moved on. And then he actually got a director of a library in a very small town in Bergen County. And it was wonderful. But as we all know, there's always a board of directors. And at the end of the year, they brought him in to change things, and he changed things. And then they didn't really want the change that they said.
Oh boy. Yeah.
And at the end of the year, he lost his position.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, he and his wife decided to move down to Florida because his wife had a job that she was doing remote and everything else. And he moved down there, and we started off doing all the same research and looking for library jobs. And he's my master networker and was networking with people, and everything was great. And he was having some interviews, but he wasn't having success. So
Right.
last year, he actually worked at a school system as an assistant teacher down there just to get some money in while he was continuing to job search. And then we started talking about, okay, well then, and it's so sad because he's a great librarian. I wish he could stay in this position, in this field, but he said, I need to look for something else. And he came across like a UX developer, something technical, I'm not exactly sure, but involved the same research skills and people skills. And he started studying whatever it was. There's a certification process for whatever it is.
Yes, there is.
And
Right.
he's been studying it all the course during the year. And then he met somebody who he's possibly going to be doing an internship for. And, he's going to move on to his next career. So, but the process is the same. Each time, it doesn't matter. It's all about figuring out who you are and what's best for you, what meets your needs, your skills, what you're looking for in your life right now. And then putting that together with what's out there and finding out what's out there. And then the process of finding the actual job. So,
well, as you're saying this, I mean, my personal experience is that I've morphed 4 times.
right.
Graduated college with an engineering degree and worked 2 years for a large corporation in a kind of a marketing / technical engineering role. And then realized that's not what I wanted to do. Went back to business school, worked as effectively in brand management, product management for a number of companies, starting with Procter & Gamble, and then Johnson & Johnson and others. And then so kind of on staff, and then I became a consultant, and then I became a career coach. So really there are 4 aspects of it. And studies are showing now that millennials can expect to shift careers 6 to 10 times during their career. And I know, my kids are 30 and 26, and, either them or several of their contemporaries that will be at a job for a couple of weeks and just say, no, don't like it, not happening. And they move on and they think nothing of it. And they think very little of making the career shift. It's like, yep, let's do it. And more power to them. And those options, as long as you can demonstrate the capability of doing what you need to be successful in the new role, you can do it. And it's all good. And my daughter transitioned into human resources when she was 23, and she had been the store manager of a Red Mango at 18, and then she worked as a sales associate at an environmental remediation company, both in New Jersey. And she wanted to move to Austin, Texas, and had an interview for a human resources coordinator with a similar type of company in terms of frozen yogurt, all natural smoothies, and all this other kind of stuff. And we're redoing a resume, and I said, Megan, you don't have any human resources experience. I mean, it's only 3 weeks when somebody was on vacation. You could really go there and be a store manager and do really well. And she said, yeah, I know. But she wanted it, and she got the job. I mean, they hired her that day when she went for the interview.
Wow.
And it's that level of confidence that comes along with your presence and way of being and way to relate to people and all that kind of stuff that makes the difference. So
I know one of the things that I always hear about people say, when should I start networking? And I see Marty's on, and I was going to say this anyway, because I knew Marty was coming after me.
Yes.
His ABCs always be connecting. But that's the truth. The first day on your job is when you're starting to figure out what you're doing next, who you're talking to, who your bosses are, what are they doing, who do you like? It never stops. It's a process that never ever stops. And that's how you figure out how to go. And I see that with, like I said, with my kids who are also in their early 30s, the same thing. It's interesting. My daughter works at Google, where they actually have it built in, which is amazing. It's an amazing company to work for, because she can do something called a bungee, where especially if someone goes on maternity leave, and they have a whole list where you can look. And if you see something that, it's a possible different area they might be interested in, you can bungee over there for 6 months. And I don't understand how her team continued to work without her there, but somehow they do. And that's Google's way of trying to keep their people in the company by always looking and learning and everything else. Ended up, she didn't like what she did at the bungee, because she didn't like the way the culture was at that point. It was for YouTube. And now she's back where she wants, where she is, and thinking about other things. And that's the other thing I tell my clients, when you start doing this research at the beginning, it may not be, yes, this is what I want to be. You may be saying a lot of time, this is what I don't want to do. Well, eliminating things you don't want to do is just sometimes as helpful as figuring out what you want to do, because you have less things to explore on what you might want to do. But it's all about constantly talking to people, constantly networking, constantly, not from a sort of, oh, well, how am I going to be able to use them in the future? No, it's just always learning about what else is out there, because there may be something that you really want to do that you're not doing now. And if you don't learn it, you don't gather that information, you don't know where to move next.
Yeah, there's an approach that I've learned in a leadership program that I also train and mentor in as we speak, called humble curiosity. And if you network with people from that standpoint, like with a real desire to find out what they do and how they feel about it, and what skill sets do you need, and how are they measured, and all that, and you're doing it from the place of, hey, I'm trying to learn here, as opposed to I'm trying to make sure I can get my tentacles into the next job, and people sense that energy right away. It's very clear. And the other part of this, and it hasn't come up directly yet, but when you're networking, and I see Marty, you're going to nod your head at this, is what can you do for the person you're speaking with? I mean, how can you support them in whatever way that is? And then it becomes a quid pro quo on a meaningful level, and that's where it becomes a relationship as opposed to a transaction.
I like that humble curiosity. I'm gonna have to write it down when the session's over. I really like
yeah,
that.
that's how I'll put in the chat, I guess. Maybe
Yeah.
we'll do that. But I'm just gonna say, I know you have many of these, but just one more, because I want to put this in the chat, and then I want to get to the last question, and then we can go from there. So just one more example of, your process, your ability to elicit what the main things are about somebody that they couldn't see in themselves, that prompted them to make a career shift, and then what the outcome was with that.
Often, again, it's really about sort of getting them to tell stories about what things that, and we all know the different exercises, the 7 stories, the things that you were successful for, the things you liked. But I had a client years ago who's, she and her husband were from India, and they moved here, and her husband kept going back and forth on jobs and businesses. And, and she was supposedly in a job search. They had young kids, because I guess his income wasn't so reliable. And she was really, and it's really about saying, when I always say to my clients, I say, don't cancel appointments because you didn't get things done. Let's talk about what got in the way. And this is what this example is, because things she never got anything done. And finally, after a whole bunch of appointments, I said to her, okay, something's going on here. I said, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think you really don't want to be working. And she started to cry. And she said, I was raised that I'm supposed to stay home with the kids, and my husband's supposed to support us. But because they came here, and whatever his job was, it wasn't enough. And so she needed to go back to work, but she really didn't want to. And that wasn't her culture. And that wasn't what she had always planned on. And that's what was getting in the way of her. So we worked on, okay, first talking about that and going through it and the feelings and everything else. And then saying, okay, well, what kind of work would be acceptable? What would make you feel fulfilled? What would, something. And it also, she ended up, I think, teaching. She went back to work in the school system. At least she was still with kids, and she was on her kids' schedules. But it was like just noticing when you have clients, appointment after appointment who are just not moving forward. It's really, I could let them keep doing that. And, back then I didn't get paid per session. Now I do, but I'm not going to let them just keep paying me because I want to keep my practice going. It's like, okay, this is not working, and I don't want to enable them. I don't want to be another person who says, oh, sure. Let's bring the elephant in the room out. Let's talk about it, and let's see how in a safe environment, and then let's see how we can get past it. So I remember her story so clearly. I reached out to her a couple of times afterwards. She was teaching part-time and seemed okay about it, and loveliest woman. She was really very sweet woman, and so didn't want to be doing that. It was not what she was supposed to be doing.
So your let's call it your loving interruption turned passive resistance into acceptance in terms of, she then accepted the fact that, okay, financially I need to work, but I'm now in a situation that I enjoy a lot more, and it lines up with the rest of my life because it was on her kids' schedules, which is great. Which is great. So recommendations that you have for those who are watching and listening on how to negotiate this process successfully. And I know you've used a lot of examples here about what you do, but if you're saying, if somebody's in the middle of this or considering it, what are your key steps in terms of negotiating the process successfully?
Well, I think one of the things, and we've all been part of so many networking groups, is don't do it alone. Whether it's a coach or a networking group or other people, a job search buddy or something. But I think one of the problems I get so many times, the clients get ghosted all the time. We all know how much we hate that, how we don't understand how the other side can do that, since they all once job search. So why is it that they don't remember what that was like? And then they'll come to me, what am I doing wrong? And I have to say, you're not doing anything wrong. If you talk to other people who are going through this process right now, you're going to hear that over and over again. This happens all the time. So I think if you're doing this in a bubble, then you don't understand that a lot of what you're going through, especially the frustration of the job search itself, you need to have people around. It'll last, since COVID, you presented, we were live. The last 2.5 years, we did the presentations on, virtually on Zoom. And I missed the live part. I really did, because people would come in a half an hour early and sit around and talk. And then they would stay so long that I would have to, I got to go to my office now. You guys can stand here and talk, but I got to leave now because in the connection. But you also have to be careful, because a lot of people can be Debbie Downers. And you don't want to just hang out with somebody who's always going to say, this sucks, I'm never going to get a job, this is never going to work, nothing's going to be any good. You want to find people who are, yes, understand what you're going through, but also can be uplifting. So a job search buddy, I think, is great, because you can keep each other, hold each other accountable. Back in 2008, 9, around then, whatever it was, we put together a boot camp, which I loved. It was so much fun. And we ran it 3 different times. We had special funding. We ran it 3 different times. There were 5 sessions, and each session we taught them something new, but it was always about what were your goals for the week, and then a group of 6 or 7 people, what did you accomplish, what didn't you, in a safe environment, and what are your goals for the next week? So there was that accountability. After each of the 3 sets, we tweaked it. After the end of the 3rd session, we actually sort of did a reunion with all 3 groups, even though a lot of the people between the groups didn't know each other. And after and I did it with a coworker, so we were co-leading the group together. After the reunion, the people continued to meet at a Panera Bread for months after that. Not all of them, but 4 or 5 of them would meet every Friday at Panera Bread and try to recreate, the accountability, the support that we were giving them in the boot camp that we were doing. And it was great. It was wonderful. So I think that, and then in addition, yes, whether it's a coach, a counselor, a therapist, whatever it is, you can get somebody to make sure that you're not doing something wrong on your interviews, to make sure your resume is really up to snuff, make sure all those pieces are okay. But like I said at the beginning, to really support you through the process, to motivate you. I always used to tell people, I'll give you a shoulder to cry on when you need one. I'm going to give you a kick in the butt when you need one too. I would call it my tough love. And they knew it. They knew that when they got it from me, that it really meant something, and they had to move on and stop procrastinating, stop denying, stop whatever it was they were doing. Because I wasn't helping them by letting them wallow in that. So that if you're in that position now and you really need to figure out how to move on, I think a combination of people who are like you and some professionals is the best way to go.
Yeah. So, not solely relying on yourself. And I also use a similar mantra, especially since things are mostly on Zoom these days, although I have started meeting clients in person more, is I may give you a virtual hug today or a virtual kick in the ass, or maybe both on this one call, depending on what it is that we're doing. So, but that's it. I mean, that's what they've hired you for. I mean, and I was, speaking about this in one of the earlier sessions, is if you hire a coach, let's just say you're worth 100,000 a year, and you pay a week or two salary, which would be 2 to 4 grand with a coach, whatever the number might be, and you get back to work a week or two sooner at a position that's at the level you deserve to be at, both financially and title wise and responsibilities and everything else, it's worth your investment. There are a lot of people who will spend more on a weekend vacation than they will on their next major career move. And that always is a head scratcher for me. So, and you kind of validated that as well. I'm going to ask those who are listening or watching, if there's any questions you have for Meryl, just to put them in the chat. And I have one more question for you before we wrap up is, have you worked with clients who are at, near, or right in the middle of retirement? And how do you go about that process in terms of getting from the traditional working world into where they don't have a schedule, or they may have a lot more free time than they ever thought possible?
So it's interesting, when you were going to ask that question. So back right before the recession, 2007, I went through a whole training program called Too Young to Retire. And there was an entire program of helping people figure out, for health-wise, spiritually, work or volunteer, all the different components of what retirement was going to look like. And the truth is, the process is the same as everything else we've been talking about. It's about sitting down and saying, what does my retirement day look like, or my retirement look like? What are my fantasies about what I want to be doing? Some people like a lot of structure. Some people don't like a lot of structure. I would go nuts if I didn't have some structure, but I also don't want too much structure. So if you're working with somebody who's going through that, and obviously the biggest piece is the financial piece.
Right.
Sit down with someone, figure out, what you can do, what you can afford, how long you can afford it, if you want to travel, if you don't want to travel. But there are just so many options these days. What they say is, I was on Jeopardy, and I think they asked the question something like, what is the 60s, not Jeopardy, whatever, some other game show, 60 is the new what? And they said 40 was the answer, or whatever, it was Family Feud or something. People retiring in 70, 80. I mean, if people are working, look at a lot of the coaches you have on this program, who I have such admiration for, especially Alex. I don't know if he's still here because I don't see him, but Alex is like an icon to all of us. And then there are other people. My parents did the Florida, play golf, but they were what they used to do every day used to exhaust me. They were taking courses, they were going out, they were playing golf, they learned golf. They never picked up a golf club until they were 65.
Wow.
So, and then suddenly I would hear them arguing about their golf scores. And I would say, who are these people? These aren't my parents. Someone stole my parents, So the process of figuring out about retirement is really the same. It's about thinking about what, when someone helping you thinking about, what can I afford? What do I want to do? Staying healthy is the key. That was one of the chapters, building in the exercise or whatever you're comfortable with, even if it's walking, and taking care of all the different components of what your life is going to be like when work ends, and whether it's working part-time, volunteering the whole time, or whatever. It's again, I did this recently with my sister, who has retired 4 or 5 years ago, and was doing some stuff. Then COVID, she was volunteering in a hospital. COVID came, a lot of stuff she couldn't do anymore. So, I said, well, you were in special ed. There's something called Friendship Circle, Lifetown, and Livingston. She now volunteers there, and it's perfect for her. It's exactly what she does, it 1 day a week, which is plenty, and some people have watching grandchildren, some people have watching elderly parents. So there are just so many moving parts when it comes to that part of your life. But the process, exactly the same, just looking at all those moving parts and trying to make sense and put them into some kind of structure.
And, as you're saying this, the process is the same. It's just a different outcome, or a different desired destination, I guess is probably the better way to say it. And I've had this conversation with several people, as I mentioned in one of the earlier sessions, I'm on the back nine, and some of my peers, contemporaries, colleagues are already either at retirement or already have retired. It's, what do you want to do, become, experience, or accomplish in your retirement years when you still have the ability to do it? One of my buddies from a Bible study is talking about writing his 3rd book, and his father is not in hospice, but pretty much not able to do the things that he used to be able to do. And we just had this conversation last week, and his father said to him, well, how old are you? So I'm 73. So you better get cracking on this, because you don't know how long you have. And we take it for granted if our health is there, that we're going to be, however long we may or may not live. You never know. So those are the questions that I put out there in terms of those who are considering that. And I'm also seeing in the chat here, which is going back a few minutes now, but Marty piped in with ABP, always be positive. Surround yourself with positive people, because the Debbie Downers will suck the life out of you. And I advise people, and I do this myself, if I'm seeing somebody take the energy out of the room, I just go find something to drink, maybe, maybe 40 proof or something, or, maybe no, 40, whatever, 80 proof. But again, energy level is important. How you present yourself, your way of being is incredibly important. Not just in the interview, but any interaction that you have with other people, job search related or not. And
just one more comment about the retirement thing.
Yeah.
And just to show how really individual it is. So two people who used to work for me, one of them, when she retired, wanted nothing to ever have to do with career stuff again. And the other one went to volunteer for Dress for Success to help coach people, or doing, two very similar people, but that's how one of them wanted it, walked away. She said, I've been doing this my whole life. And she walked away from it. And the other one was like, no, I have something still to give back. So, so it's really very individual, like you said, on what you want to accomplish, what do you want to get out of your life during your retirement time.
You got it. So any other final thoughts? I'm looking, I think, wait a minute, there's
any questions?
No, I'm looking for some questions here, and there's some folks who are providing their information in terms of connection. By the way, the links to all of the interviews today, a copy of my ebook, Finding God's Purpose for Your Career. It's the 35 pages. The full book is 150, plus what an interview consultation with me is all available if you sign up through the registration page that you landed on. And I will also add to that, and I sort of knew I could do this, but it was brought to my attention that I can do it. And then it is also attached the chat file, which I'm having the Zoom on all morning and all afternoon and evening. So it's going to be a long document, but there'll be a lot of stuff in there that you can refer back to in text file form, it looks like. But I will save that as well after the recording is over. So, Meryl, I just want to thank you for taking the time today. Great working with you in this format. And you're really good on the other side of the camera, by the way. For what it's worth. And we'll go from there. All right. Thank you.
Look, I want to thank you for having me here. Like I said, moving into this next phase and being on my own and whatever. And I just want to continue helping people the most I can. And, anyone wants to come find me at Canada Career Services, it's on the web. And otherwise, thank you for inviting me amongst this wonderful list of panelists who I've always admired for a long time, and thank them, whoever's still on or will be on, for having helped me in my job previously do what I did so well, because I had them as part of my family. So, and I really think of all of us as a family, because we are, and we are here for each other. And that's what people should be doing. I wish anybody who's out there, who's looking, just be good to yourself and give yourself some time, but take it seriously, and you'll land. Everybody lands. Somebody says that. Who says that? One of the coaches. You say that. Marty says it. I don't know. Somebody said that. So, hopefully you will land and land soon. And I don't know about the other coaches, but the best part of my job is hearing that people landed. So, make my day anytime. Okay.
Exactly. And thanks again. And with that, we'll stop the recording and we'll stay on the chat if you like.